Karma never forgets a name, and it never misses its mark. Witness the scales of justice slowly balance themselves in every cinematic chapter we bring to life. Experience the powerful reality of payback right here. Subscribe now to see the truth unfold before your eyes.
You telling me my own sister-in-law booked my spa for her bachelorette party and put in a special request that I not be contacted under any circumstances? I had to read the message twice. My operations manager, Tessa, had sent it at 7:14 in the morning, and I was still in my kitchen holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold while I stood there staring at my phone screen. I called her back immediately. "Walk me through exactly what happened," I said. Tessa sounded like she hadn't slept. She called the front desk at our Midtown location 2 days ago. Booked the full bachelorette experience. The private suite. The couple's massages for 8 guests. The champagne brunch package. The works. She gave her name as Harlow Bennett, paid a deposit by card. The front desk coordinator is new, started 3 weeks ago, so she didn't recognize the last name. It wasn't until she was updating the VIP notes this morning and mentioned it to me that I made the connection. And the request, she specifically said, and I'm quoting from the notes here, that the booking was a surprise for the bride and that under no circumstances should the owner be informed or involved. She said there had been a recent family situation and she wanted the day to run smoothly without any complications. I set my coffee mug down on the counter very carefully. Harlow Bennett, my sister-in-law, the woman who had spent the last 4 years making it quietly, persistently clear that she considered me a temporary inconvenience in her brother's life. She had just booked my spa, my flagship location, the one that had been featured in Vogue, and had a 3-month wait list for weekend packages for her bachelorette party. And she had specifically arranged to keep me out of it. What she didn't know, because she had never once asked, was that I owned the entire building. My name is Josephine Carr. Most people call me Jo. I'm 41 years old, and I have been married to my husband, Elliot Bennett, for 9 years. In that time, his sister Harlow has never once asked me what I do for a living. Not at Christmas dinner. Not at the engagement party we threw for her 2 years ago. Not at any of the 17 family events I attended, smiled through, and quietly endured. To the Bennett family, I was simply Elliot's wife, the one who came from a working-class family in Akron. The one whose mother was a hospital receptionist and whose father drove a delivery truck until his back gave out. The one who, according to Harlow, Elliot could have done better than if he had just been more patient. She actually said that. Not to me directly, to her mother, at Easter 2 years ago, in the kitchen, while I was standing in the hallway right outside the door. She didn't know I could hear her. I never told Elliot. What the Bennett family didn't know, what they had never taken the 30 seconds to ask about, was that Tranquil Collective, the spa brand with locations in 4 cities and a 5th opening in 6 months, was mine. I had started it 11 years ago with a single treatment room above a dry cleaner in Philadelphia, funded by a small business loan I had spent 8 months qualifying for. I had built it from 1 room into a company with 63 full-time employees, a product line carried in Nordstrom, and a client list that included 2 senators and a morning talk show host I'm not allowed to name. I operated under my maiden name for the business, Josephine Carr. The Bennetts knew my name was Carr before I married Elliot, but as far as they were concerned it was just a name. Nobody had ever Googled me, nobody had ever asked. When Harlow's fiancé, a perfectly pleasant man named Theodore, had once mentioned over dinner that he'd heard of Tranquil Collective and that his coworker had waited 2 months for an appointment, Harlow had changed the subject to her upcoming ski trip before anyone could follow the thread. So she had booked my spa for a party I was not invited to. I sat down at the kitchen table and thought about it for a long time. Then I called Tessa back and told her to let the booking stand. "Don't change a single thing," I said. "Let every upgrade go through. If she calls to add anything, approve it. I want to know every detail of what she's planning, every service she books, every special request. And on the day of the event, I'll be there." There was a pause. "Jo, what are you going to do?" "My job," I said. "Exceptionally well. I should give you some context about Harlow, because she isn't simply a rude person. She's a specific kind of person, the kind who is never overtly cruel, never does anything you could point to in isolation and say, that was wrong. It's always a collection of small things, a tone, a redirected conversation, an invitation that somehow never arrived. In 9 years, she had never visited our house without making at least one comment about something Elliot could have done differently with his life. She referenced his ex-girlfriend, a woman named Cassandra from a family she approved of, so frequently that I had started mentally counting 18 times in the past year alone. I know because I started keeping a note in my phone after the 10th time, just so I knew I wasn't imagining it. Her mother Margaret was gentler about it, but no more welcoming. She was the kind of woman who gave compliments that were structured like criticisms. "You look so healthy, Joe," she once said at a dinner, which somehow did not feel like a compliment. She asked about my work occasionally, but when I answered, her eyes drifted. She wasn't listening. She was waiting for a pause so she could ask about Harlow's job, Harlow's apartment, Harlow's most recent vacation. Elliot knew there was friction. He said the right things. He told me his family needed time, that his mother was set in her ways, that Harlow was overprotective of him because of how their father had left when they were kids. He was kind about it. He just never did anything about it. I had learned to manage my expectations, but this was different. Harlow had used my professional reputation to secure this booking. The new coordinator had approved the reservation because Harlow mentioned she was connected to the owner. She had leveraged the connection she pretended didn't exist to gain access to a place I had built, and then arranged for me to be kept away from it. The audacity of that was so complete it was almost architectural. The event was scheduled for a Saturday 3 weeks out. I had plenty of time to prepare. I want to be honest about something. During those 3 weeks, I thought hard about whether what I was planning was right. I'm not someone who enjoys confrontation. I spent years in this marriage being the person who absorbed things quietly, who chose the long game, who told herself that patience was a form of strength. And maybe it was. But at some point, patience stops being strength and starts being permission. I had been giving the Bennett family permission to treat me as invisible for 9 years. I was done. On the morning of Harlow's bachelorette party, I drove to the Midtown location 2 hours before the guests were due to arrive. My staff knew I was coming. I had briefed my senior team the day before, not dramatically, just clearly. I told them that our guests that day would include my sister-in-law, who was not aware that I owned the business. I told them I would be present. I asked them to do what they always did, which was their jobs with precision and care, because that was what I had hired them to do. My esthetician Camille, who had been with me since the 2nd year, squeezed my arm when I walked in. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. And I mostly was. I was calm in a way I hadn't expected. Not numb, calm. The way you feel when you've made a decision that you know is correct. Harlow and her 7 guests arrived at 11. I watched from the consultation room through the interior window that looked out onto the reception area. She was wearing a white linen set and carrying an oversized tote that probably cost more than my first month's rent in Philadelphia. Her friends were loud and cheerful and clearly already a glass of something ahead of the morning. Theodore's sister was there, 2 women I recognized from social media, a college friend who had been at the wedding reception we'd hosted for them 2 years ago and had spoken to me for about 45 seconds. Harlow checked in at the front desk with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She gave her name, the coordinator. I had made sure it was Tessa handling the desk this morning, not the new hire. Confirmed the reservation with a warm smile and zero recognition on her face. Harlow looked pleased, relaxed, like this was all going exactly according to plan. They were shown to the private suite. Champagne was poured. The morning began. I waited until they were settled, until the first round of treatments had started and the room had that particular loosened, warm quality that a spa morning produces. Then I walked in. I had dressed simply, dark trousers, a white blouse, my hair back. I wore the small gold name tag that I wore on days when I did walkthroughs, the one that said Josephine Carr, founder. I wanted there to be no confusion about who I was. I opened the door to the private suite and stepped inside. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when something unexpected enters them. 2 of the friends looked up with polite curiosity. Theodore's sister frowned slightly, trying to place me, and Harlow, who was sitting with her feet in a pedicure basin and a glass of champagne in her hand, turned her head, and her expression moved through surprise and confusion and something that might have been the first edge of understanding. "Joe," she said, "what are you doing here?" "Good morning," I said. I smiled the same smile I use at every business function I have ever attended. Warm, direct, completely steady. I wanted to come by and personally welcome you to Tranquil. I tried to do that for special occasions when I can. One of her friends laughed a little nervously. Oh, do you work here? I own it, I said. All 4 locations. I'm Josephine Carr. The silence that followed was a very specific kind of silence. The kind where people are doing math in their heads. Harlow set her champagne glass down slowly. You own this. I do. I've owned it for 11 years. The Midtown location opened 6 years ago. This one's actually my flagship, which has got our 3rd consecutive feature in Condé Nast Traveler, which was a nice surprise. I looked around the room. I hope everything has been to your liking so far. The team here is exceptional. Her friend, the one who'd been at the wedding, leaned forward. Wait, you're Elliot's wife? I am. So this is your sister-in-law's bachelorette party, she said slowly, looking between us. Apparently so. I looked at Harlow. I wasn't aware you'd booked with us until my operations manager flagged it earlier this week. I thought I'd stop in. Harlow's jaw had that particular set to it that I recognized from 9 years of family dinners. The set that meant she was working out how to reframe the situation. We didn't realize this was your place. I just chose it because it has good reviews. That's kind. We work hard for those reviews. I paused. I did want to mention one thing, since I'm here. When you made the reservation, you told our coordinator that you were connected to the owner and that the owner shouldn't be informed. I understand the impulse to want a clean, uncomplicated day. I hope you understand why I felt I should be aware of an event happening in my own business. The room had gone very still. Theodore's sister was staring at her feet. The friends were all doing that thing people do when they want to not be in a room. Harlow's voice came out careful and even. I just didn't want any awkwardness. What awkwardness? I asked, not sharply. Genuinely, with the full weight of 9 years behind it. She didn't answer. Harlow, I said, and I let some of the warmth out of my voice. Not to be cold, just to be real. I've been part of your family for 9 years. I have been at every birthday dinner, every holiday, every event your mother has organized. I have sent gifts and shown up and tried, consistently, to build a relationship with you. You chose to hold your bachelorette party in a place that belongs to me and then specifically asked that I not be told about it. I'd like to understand what I've done to warrant that. Her chin lifted. This isn't the time or place, Joe. I agree, but it's the time and place you created. I reached into my jacket pocket and set an envelope on the table in front of her. This is your updated invoice. I had our billing department run the full itemization this morning, with the champagne package, the extended suite rental, the private brunch, the add-on treatments your guests booked at check-in, and the surcharge for a same-week premium booking. The total comes to just under $11,000. Harlow stared at the envelope. We already paid a deposit based on a different quote. The quote your coordinator received reflected a standard booking. You made several additions after the initial reservation was confirmed, which is completely fine. That's what we're here for. The deposit will be applied to the total. The remainder is due at checkout. I didn't realize. The pricing is in the booking agreement that was emailed when the reservation was confirmed, I said pleasantly. The one that includes our cancellation and modification policy. She picked up the envelope and opened it, and I watched her eyes move down the itemized list. I watched the color shift in her face. I have to call Theodore, she said. Of course, take your time. I'll let you get back to your morning. I looked around the room one more time. Enjoy the rest of the treatments. The team will take excellent care of you. I paused at the door. And congratulations on the engagement, Harlow. I mean that. Then I walked out. I went to my office on the 3rd floor and sat for about 20 minutes doing nothing in particular. Camille came up and knocked on the door frame. How do you feel? She asked. Strange, I said honestly, but okay. She came out of the suite and asked to speak to a manager about the invoice. What did Tessa tell her? That all billing matters go through you. She smiled slightly. She went back into the suite. I nodded. Good. Elliot called me at noon. I had been expecting it. Her friend texted Theodore, he said. He didn't say hello first. I know. Joe, he exhaled. What happened? I went to work, I said. And in my own business. And I introduced myself to the people who were using it. There was a pause. She's upset. I imagine she is. She says you ambushed her. I thought about the word ambush. I thought about $11,000 and an instruction to keep the owner in the dark. Elliot, your sister booked my flagship spa for a party and specifically told my staff not to contact me. She used our connection to get the booking approved. She planned to spend a full day in a place I built and specifically arranged for me not to know about it. I showed up. That's not an ambush. That's just Tuesday. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. I didn't know she'd done that. I know you didn't. How long has this been going on? The spa. I knew about it obviously, but I didn't know the scope. Because no one in your family ever asked, I said. Not with heat, just as a fact. 11 years, Elliot. 4 cities. 63 employees. We were just shortlisted for a national wellness award. Your mother has never asked me a single question about my work that she actually waited for the answer to. Harlow didn't know the name of my company until today. I have been showing up to your family's events for 9 years and nobody has ever once been curious about who I am. He was quiet for a long time. You should have told me it was this bad, he said finally. I told you repeatedly that your family made me feel invisible. You told me they needed time. That's not, I know what you were trying to do, I said. I know you love your family and I know Harlow's your sister and I know it's complicated. But at some point, protecting their feelings stopped feeling like grace and started feeling like agreement. I'm not doing it anymore. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, what do you need from me? It was such a simple question. I had waited years for it. I need you to stop explaining their behavior to me, I said. I need you to be as uncomfortable with how they treat me as I am. That's it. I don't need you to fight anyone. I just need you to stop making it okay. He said he would think about it. Harlow's party continued. The team did their jobs as they always do, without drama or performance. At checkout, Harlow paid the balance. Theodore had apparently called his own mother, who had then called Harlow, and whatever that conversation was had resulted in a very quiet exit from the spa around 3 in the afternoon. Elliot came home that evening while I was making dinner. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment before he came in, and I could see him working through something. I called my mom, he said. I kept stirring. And I told her what Harlow did. The whole thing, the request to keep you out of it, the fact that she used your name to get the booking, the invoice. He came to stand beside me at the counter. My mom didn't know about the spa. She kept saying she didn't know, and I kept saying, that's the point. That's actually the point. That's actually the point. I looked at him. She's been in your life for 9 years, he said, and his voice had that quality it gets when he's genuinely ashamed of something. She's been in our house. She's watched you leave at 6 in the morning for work. She's heard you take calls on Christmas morning. She's been sitting across from you at a dinner table twice a year for almost a decade, and it never once occurred to her to ask what you actually do. He shook his head. I knew it bothered you. I didn't let myself understand how much. Why not? He was quiet. Then, because understanding it fully would have required me to do something about it, and I was afraid that doing something would cost me my family. I appreciated the honesty. I always had. It was one of the reasons I'd married him. I'm not asking you to choose, I said. I've never asked you to choose. I know, but I've been acting like you were, and that was easier than admitting my family had a problem. He turned to face me. I talked to Harlow too. How did that go? She's embarrassed. And angry, which is what Harlow does when she's embarrassed. He paused. She said some things I'm not going to repeat because they weren't fair. But I also said some things I should have said a long time ago. I told her that what she did was a deliberate exclusion, that using your name to access your business and then specifically blocking you from knowing about it wasn't a misunderstanding or an oversight. It was a choice, and that I was done pretending those kinds of choices were okay. I set down the spoon. How did she respond? She hung up. He gave a small, tired smile. She'll come around. She always does eventually. But I needed to say it, and she needed to hear it, and I should have been saying versions of it for years. It wasn't everything. I want to be clear about that. One conversation doesn't repair 9 years of being treated as a background figure in your own marriage. Elliot and I had work to do. Real work. The kind that takes time and honesty and more than one uncomfortable evening. But it was a start. And it was the first start that had been initiated by him rather than by my exhaustion. 3 months later, Harlow got married. It was a beautiful ceremony at a vineyard upstate, and I was there in a deep green dress, seated in the third row next to Elliot. She had sent me a formal invitation, which was notable mainly because previous events had arrived via the group family text with a "hope you can make it" attached. This one was addressed to both of us, specifically in her handwriting. She didn't speak to me much at the reception, but at the end of the night, when the speeches were done and the dancing had started and the older relatives were drifting toward the exits, she found me at the bar. She was still in her dress, her hair starting to come loose from whatever elaborate structure her stylist had built that morning. She looked like herself, which was the most I could say for her. "I looked up Tranquil Collective," she said. "Not as an opening. Just as a statement." "Okay," I said. "You were in the journal last year." "The business section, yes." She picked up her drink. Didn't look at me directly. I didn't know. "I know you didn't." I should have asked. She said it like she was reading from a card, like it had been rehearsed, which it probably had. I didn't hold that against her. Most real apologies are rehearsed. The practice doesn't make them less true. I spent a long time thinking you weren't, that you weren't really part of us, and I wanted a lot of reasons for that to be okay. It wasn't okay. I looked at her for a moment. She was the kind of woman who wasn't used to being wrong. Admitting it, out loud, in her wedding dress, at her own reception, cost her something. I could see that it did. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you probably know." She nodded once, tightly, and drifted back toward her new husband. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't friendship, but it was an acknowledgement, and sometimes that's what the beginning of something looks like. A few weeks after the wedding, I began the build-out on our 5th location, Nashville, which had been on my shortlist for 2 years. I had signed the lease in October and was overseeing the design with an interior firm I'd worked with before, an industrial meets warm wood aesthetic that I thought would suit the space. I mentioned it at a family dinner, not dramatically, just in passing, the way you mention things happening in your life to people who are supposed to be your family. Margaret asked a question, an actual question, with a follow-up, and her eyes stayed on me while I answered. It was a small thing, the smallest possible thing, but I noticed it, and I let it matter. I spent a lot of years being invisible because the people around me didn't think to look. I don't believe most of them were malicious. I think they were incurious, which is its own kind of failure, slower and quieter but just as corrosive over time. What I've learned, the thing I would go back and tell the younger version of myself, the one standing outside that kitchen doorway hearing things she was never supposed to hear, is that invisibility is never yours to fix. You cannot make people see by making yourself smaller, or more accommodating, or more patient. You make yourself seen by standing in the room you built and refusing to disappear. I built something. It took 11 years and 100,000 early mornings and more than one stretch when I wasn't sure it was going to work. It exists because I made it exist. And nobody, not a mother-in-law who redirects conversations, not a sister-in-law who books appointments she doesn't want me to know about, not a husband who took too long to understand what was being asked of him. Nobody gets to walk through something I built without knowing that it belongs to me. That's not a threat, it's just the truth, and I'm done being quiet about it. If this story resonated with you, please like and share. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need to hear it. And if you've ever spent years feeling unseen by the people who are supposed to know you best, I hope you know you're not alone. Until next time, take care of yourself. You've earned it. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that Saturday, not the invoice, not the look on Harlow's face when I said the words "I own it." What I keep coming back to is something quieter. The fact that it took 11 years for anyone in that family to Google my name. That's not an accusation, it's a cause and effect. When you treat someone like a footnote long enough, you stop being curious about them. And when you stop being curious about people, you stop seeing them accurately. The Bennetts had a picture of me in their heads. Elliot's wife, the one from Akron, the one with the working class parents, and they never updated it because they never looked. That's not malice. That's the slow, quiet erosion of regard that happens when people decide, early on, that someone isn't worth the effort of knowing. The consequence of that choice was that Harlow walked into a room I built and assumed it belonged to someone else. She spent real money, made real plans, and arranged for me to be deliberately excluded from a space that existed because of me. Not because she was cruel. Because she had never once asked. There's something almost mathematical about that. The disregard you extend to people doesn't disappear. It compounds, it collects, and eventually, it produces exactly the moment you were trying to avoid, in front of exactly the people you least wanted to witness it. I'm not going to tell you I handled everything perfectly. I sat with a lot of anger for a long time. There were years when I swallowed things I should have said, when I made myself smaller to keep the peace, when I told myself patience was the same thing as dignity. It isn't, always. Sometimes patience is just postponement, and what I postponed for 9 years was the simple insistence that I deserved to be known. What I understand now, what I would go back and tell myself at 32, standing outside a kitchen doorway hearing things I wasn't supposed to hear, is that your integrity is the thing you protect by being honest about what you've built. Not boastful, not defensive, just honest. When you downplay your own accomplishments to make other people comfortable, you are teaching them, every single day, that it's acceptable to underestimate you. Elliot didn't stand up for me partly because I had never stood up fully for myself in front of his family. I had been so focused on not causing friction that I had caused a different kind of damage. The kind that comes from being chronically undervalued by people who don't know better because you never showed them. Harlow's apology at her wedding reception was stilted and rehearsed and real. I know the difference. It cost her something, and I respected that it did. What she gave me that night wasn't friendship, it was recognition. And recognition, even late, even imperfect, is where something honest can begin. I opened the Nashville location 4 months after that reception. I went to the ribbon cutting alone, which was fine, because I have done most of the important things in my life somewhat alone. But I did call my mother that evening, and I told her what we built. And she cried a little. And I did too. That mattered more than any invoice. Build the thing. Do the work. Let what you make speak for itself when the moment comes. And when the moment comes, walk in like you own the place. Because you do.